The money order bill for gold. The Democracy on April 5, 1933, issued an executive order removing the gold from circulation as currency. This executive order served the same function as a money order to the United States people for the purchase of all the gold in society. What the president did was build the bonds of the people by accommodation. And that what he did was he took the gold away from the people's holdings without their endorsement on the money order that removed all the gold from the banks and corporations. Gold is substance and was used in the payment of debts. When the president wrote the money order for all the gold to be taken out of the system and placed with the government then removed the people's ability to pay a debt. Thus, they removed the government removed the people's ability to pay a debt because they didn't have any money to pay with, thus freeing us from bondage of owing a debt. The golden rule is usually summed up: he who has the gold makes the rules. Well, it sounds Mosaic to me. Here's another part of the golden rule they don't tell you about: he who has the gold pays the bills. They got the money, they make the payments. The government then became indebted to the people to pay all the debts because the government was holding all the money. You ever heard the phrase, all money is loaned into existence? Well, that is right, because they are borrowing it from me. This money order debited the people by removing the gold from their possession, which in turn credited the United States government with all of the newly held gold in their possession. This exchange is halfway completed because the gold was taken from the people and nothing had yet been returned. The people now need something in this exchange to balance out the ledger and recredit their original holdings. To complete the exchange, the United States debited themselves with a bond, and in parentheses they have public policy, which in return recredited the people with public policy. This was the executing order from the president, killing the legal capacity of the government to control the people. The government was then dead/debt. Phonetically, it sounds similar. Here's another interesting part. The debtor always has the money because he is the one borrowing it. So when the president wrote the money order, which took the gold, they became the borrower/debtor. And that is why there is a public debt. It is because they are borrowing money from us, the owner. What must happen now is the debt must be redeemed back to the owner. The next page is the executive order or money order that killed the government and made them the ones liable for every debt they associate to. When you see executive, think execute, and when you see order, think money order. Because all the money was taken away in an executive order or a money order, the president is holding all the money that can pay the bills. Here's an example. A national emergency occurs, an executive order is issued, and money can now be sent to the victims. Another example is when Mexico got money from the U.S., the Congress said no, but the president, by executive order, then sent the money. Another example is when the prisons are running out of money, an executive order can be issued, and now prisons get all the funding they need. All right. Now, if I make a couple comments on what the author wrote, I agree with what the author is writing. I think he put it together very well. Key important points to point out is that when we look at the monetary system, we're dealing with a system that runs now on a commercial policy of credits and debits, and we see that the executive officer of the United States, the president, is pretty much at the head of this monetary policy in some degrees. So this is important because when we get into bonds and we start looking at remedy, we get into the Trading with the Enemy Act, the alien custodian of record, and holding the property and things like that. All of that stuff takes place under the executive branch of government. So when you think of the executive branch of government, we're thinking of the Trading with the Enemy Act, monetary and commercial policy, and custodians of property, custodians of record. So that'll come up probably a little bit later in the research of the bond. So that was 11. Now let's go on into 12. Let's see here. And this is page 12, and this is the actual executive order. He was talking about the order that withdrew the gold from the people. So this is that executive order. Under executive order of the President issued April 5th, 1933, all persons are required to deliver, on or before May 1st, 1933, all gold coin, gold bullion, and gold certificates now owned by them to a Federal Reserve Bank, branch, or agency, or to any member of the Federal Reserve System. This is by executive order, forbidding the hoarding of gold coin, gold bullion, and gold certificates. By virtue of the authority vested in me by Section 5B of the Act of October 6, 1917, and I believe that act is known as the Trading with the Enemy Act. That is part of what makes up the Trading with the Enemy Act. As amended by Section 2 of the Act of March 9th, 1933, entitled An Act to Provide Relief in the Existing Emergency in Banking and for Other Purposes, in which amendatory act Congress declared that a serious emergency crisis, I, Franklin D. Roosevelt, President of the United States of America, do declare that said national emergency still continues to exist, and pursuant to said section, do hereby prohibit the hoarding of gold coin, gold bullion, and gold certificates within the continental United States by individuals, partnerships, associations, and corporations, and hereby prescribe the following regulations for carrying on the purposes of this order. Alright, so I'm going to pause there for a second. So it's interesting to note, and for anyone who's new studying this, that in order to execute these powers, he made a declaration that there was a national emergency, right? And that's under his powers as the president. So that is whereby he took the authority to make it unlawful to hold or hoard gold and silver, thereby pulling all the gold and silver out of circulation. Section 1. For the purposes of this regulation, the term hoarding means the withdrawal and withholding of gold coin, gold bullion, or gold certificates from the recognized and customary channels of trade. The term person means any individual, partnership, association, or corporation. So they just basically took gold coin and bullion out of all customary channels of trade. And that's what happened by the executive order. Alright. Now, of course, just some things to note. I'll just so you can think about when you're trying to understand the monetary system, the credit and debit based system as we have now, is there was no ATM machines at the time this was written, and there was no swipe cards, and a lot of the commerce, how it's done now, is much differently. It's just something to factor in and think about. But anyway, okay, so now we're on 13, and by the way, this is something, what I'm reading from are about 54 pages or 54 chapters of a document I received some years ago called Freely Received. I don't really know who wrote this, but it's a very good, excellent breakdown to give you a more in-depth understanding of what's going on in commerce. So this is available for free on thctrust.org. You can download this. It's under Discharge Debt, Section 1. And that's also probably where you'll find this video. I'm just trying to get some general information out there because a lot of people are very, I'm noticing that a lot of newer people for the first time are still finding out and going down this path and searching for information. So trying to assist putting some resources out there for you. All right, so now continuing along, we were just talking about the executive order that the president used to withdraw the gold out of circulation. And now we're looking at the supersedeas bond to pay our debts or to stave off the execution. HJR 192 of June 5th, 1933 is the bond the government issued to balance the exchange, to recredit the people, and is our insurance policy to stave off execution of the law, which allows it to pass over us for our benefit. The bond is on the debit side of the United States government's ledger, which was a debit from their credit created by executive order of April 5th, 1933, when they took the gold out of circulation. Public policy is rooted in HJR 192 and is grace that creates our exemption. Okay, I have to make this important note on this. I'm just chiming in here. Public policy is rooted in HJR 192. This was probably written in the 90s or something. I don't really know. The thing is, you always have to remember this. So this is kind of being presented to you as a foundation. Here it is, 2019, and we're not really discharging debts with HJR 192. It's more of a credit and a debit-based system, at least from my understanding. But we got all the way here, and this is the fundamental. This is what happened back when, before we went under this new system. And it's important to know the origin and the history of it, because you have to be able to stand on whatever commercial remedies you facilitate. Okay, so that's all I want to interject, but let me continue to read. Public policy is rooted in HJR 192 and is grace that creates our exemption. This is your temporal savings grace. Under grace, the law falls away to create a more perfect contract. Public policy removed the people's liability to make all payments by making a contract null if it required payment in substance or debt, because the people didn't have any money to pay with. All that must be done now is to discharge the liability, and pay and discharge are similar words, but the principles are as different as Old and New Testaments. The word pay is equated with gold and silver, or something of substance, like a firstborn lamb, which requires tangible work to be invested in it to remove the liability, because an execution must occur. The word discharge is equated with paper, or even more basic simple credits and debits that exist on paper, only like the slate held by the agents/angels of heaven that gets wiped clean when you pray. You cannot pay a bill with a bill, and you cannot pay a debt with a debt, and you can't pay a debt with notes. You need a bond to pay a bill, and that's what public policy does. The best we can do is, if a debt exists, is to write it off, and that can only happen if we give the property back to the original owner. See, corporations pay with debt instruments, and we pay with asset instruments. Look at this example. Bail notices write, pay by check or money order. Do not send cash. HJR 192 made it against public policy to pay with debt. Therefore, if you didn't get a check with their demand, their order for money needs to be returned, as they have failed to give you appropriated. All right, I'm not going to read all of that. Let me see. Let me see if there's anything else in here important to read. It is probably important, but you can go in here and read this. I just wanted to really direct your attention to it. So some of the things important was really in the first paragraph I seen here. And if you understand the significance of what he is calling a bond, one thing the author is saying is that a bond is public policy, right? So you can think in terms like this. It would be public policy because it's something that you can apply and you can use against the public policy officers, enforcers, or in general. From here, I'm not going to read the rest of this one, but let's just go right on into HJR 192, which is the bond for the bill that was written withdrawing the money, or is the bond for the money order. So public policy, HJR 192, joint resolution to suspend the gold standard and abrogate the gold clause, June 5th, 1933, House Joint Resolution 192, 73rd Congress, first session. Joint resolution to assure the uniform value to the coins and currencies of the United States, whereas the holding of or dealing in gold affect the public interest and therefore subject to proper regulation and restriction, and whereas the existing emergency has disclosed that the provision of obligations which purport to give the obligee a right to require payment in gold or a particular kind of coin or currency of the United States, or in an amount of money of the United States measured thereby, obstruct the power of the Congress to regulate the value of money of the United States, and are inconsistent with the declared policy of the Congress to maintain at all times the equal power of every dollar, coin, or issued by the United States in the markets and in the payments of debts. Now therefore be it resolved by the Senate and the House of Representatives of the United States of America in Congress assembled that A. Every provision contained in or made with respect to any obligation which purports to give the obligee a right to require payment in gold or a particular kind of coin or currency, or in any amount in money of the United States measured thereby, is declared to be against public policy, and no such provision shall be contained in or made with respect to any obligation hereafter incurred. Every obligation heretofore or hereafter incurred, whether or not any such provision is contained therein or made with respect thereto, shall be discharged upon payment, dollar for dollar, in any such coin or currency which at the time of payment is legal tender for the public and private debts. Is legal tender for public and private debts. Any such provision contained in any law authorizing obligations to be issued by or under authority of the United States is hereby repealed, but the repeal of any such provision shall not invalidate any other provision or authority contained under the law. So the author goes on to say, as used, oh no, that's not the author, this is what the public policy says. As used in this resolution, the term obligation means an obligation including every obligation of and to the United States, except in currency payable in money of the United States. The term coin or currency means coin or currency of the United States, including Federal Reserve notes and circulating notes of the Federal Reserve banks and national bank associations. So this is why they say, this is why when people, as we were saying earlier, HJR 192 is at the root of the financial policy in the United States. And in here they said that these debt obligations can be discharged by payment in any such coin or currency which at the time of payment is legal tender for public and private debts. So then you go into the research and the definition. Okay, well, what is legal tender? And then that takes you into currency, lawful money, and I encourage you to maybe pause this video and go look up what those are, currency and lawful money, and there's many places you can look them up. But all of this, I'm just saying, is the things that you want to be looking at, what you want to be absorbing, so that you understand how to navigate and why to navigate. And again, this is from Freely Received and Freely Given. It's on the first page of Discharge Debt Menu, thctrust.org. And I'm giving you this because I think this is the primer that you need to help you understand what's going on with your mortgages, what's going on with your notes, which are obligations, so you don't discharge debts with notes, particularly because notes establish obligations. Notes might be presented for payment, but as we're seeing, as the author is explaining here, it's bonds that do the most for discharging. So let's see here. All right.